Chapter 1. The alarms tore through the silence of the SS Perseus, dragging Elara Nash from her thoughts. A shrill, incessant noise pulsed through the command deck, reverberating off the cold, metallic walls. The digital screens flickered to life, one by one, each flashing warnings in red, urgent, chaotic. She glanced at the monitor in front of her. Unauthorized transmission detected. Source: Mining Station 7. Distress signal. Complete loss of communication. Elara's jaw clenched. The mining station was deep on the surface of Xel'Tharr, far from the colony's main hub. If something had gone wrong there, it was bigger than a simple technical malfunction. "Helm, bring us in closer to the mining station," Elara commanded. Her voice was calm, but the urgency behind it was palpable. She turned to her first officer, Lieutenant Dorian Price, who was already on his feet, hands flying across the console. "Commander, we've got a faint signal, but it's encrypted. Could be their emergency beacon, but it's intermittent. Might be jammed." Price's voice echoed the same tension that tightened Elara's chest. "Patch me through," Elara ordered. She didn't wait for a response before her fingers hovered over the comms panel. The air around her seemed to grow colder as the static buzzed in her ears. "This is Captain Elara Nash of the SS Perseus. We're receiving your distress signal. State your emergency." The crackling on the other end was thick, as if the transmission had been broken into pieces, with only fragments making it through. A voice, distorted and panicked, came through, barely human. "They're coming. It's not SAF, please." The signal cut out, leaving only a chilling silence. "Damn it!" Elara's eyes narrowed, her mind working quickly. She turned to Price. "Get us to the station. Full throttle." Minutes later, the SS Perseus broke through the clouds of Xel'Tharr, cutting through the thick, green atmosphere. The planet was beautiful from a distance, but beneath its tranquil surface, there was an unmistakable tension. As the ship descended toward the mining station, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The station came into view, jagged and stark against the lush landscape, with dark shadows creeping from its exterior. No lights. No signs of life. A chilling sight for what was supposed to be a bustling industrial hub. Elara's eyes narrowed as she scanned the area. "No survivors," Price murmured, his voice just above a whisper as he stood beside her. "Not yet," Elara said, her gaze fixed on the ominous structure. "We're not leaving until we know what happened." The landing was smooth, but the moment they stepped onto the surface of the station, something was wrong. The air was heavy with the smell of ozone and rust. As Elara moved toward the entrance with her team, she noticed the scattered debris, pieces of machinery, torn metal plates, scorch marks on the ground. It was like something had torn its way through the place. "Keep alert," Elara ordered, her voice low but commanding. She motioned for her team to spread out. "Weapons ready. And don't assume anything's dead just because it's quiet." They moved through the main entrance, where the large metal doors had been ripped off their hinges. It was eerily still inside, the silence pressing down like a weight. The lights were out, only the pale glow from their helmets illuminating the path ahead. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as they moved deeper. The metallic scent in the air was sharp, and her boots clanged against the cold, smooth floor. She paused when she reached the central control room. The terminals were shattered. Chairs overturned. But what caught her eye first were the deep gashes across the walls, long, jagged scratches, as if something had been dragged, or worse, scraped along the surface. The marks were too sharp, too deliberate to be an accident. "We've got company," muttered Corporal Jensen, his voice tight. Elara didn't respond. She crouched, inspecting the claw marks. They were unlike anything human-made. No known species had claws like these, no known predator, either. And there was a stench, something decaying, yet alien, that made her stomach turn. "We need to keep moving," she said, straightening up and turning to the others. "Clear the rest of the station. And if you see anything at all, don't hesitate. We don't know what we're dealing with here." They spread out again, moving cautiously through the dark corridors. Every step was slow, deliberate, as if the shadows themselves were alive and watching. It was in these moments that Elara realized how ill-prepared they were for this. The Xel'Tharr, if that's what they were, had left no trace of their movements. Just destruction, and an eerie silence. They reached the storage bay at the far end of the station when Jensen suddenly froze, his gun raised. "Captain, look." Elara followed his gaze to a set of large cargo doors that had been torn open. Inside the storage area, there were more scratches, more damage. But what stood out was the blood, too much blood to belong to any human. And then there was the sound, soft, almost imperceptible, like a whispering breeze. Elara's heart rate quickened. "Do you hear that?" Price asked, his voice barely a murmur. Elara nodded, her breath catching. There was a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She looked back to the others. "Move back." Slowly. They retreated toward the entrance, but just as Elara stepped through the threshold, something moved, a blur of motion, a dark shape darting across the corridor. It was fast, too fast. The sound of scraping metal echoed through the air. Before anyone could react, a blast of intense heat and force slammed into the group, knocking Elara off her feet. She hit the floor hard, her vision blurring as she struggled to rise. The station's lights flickered back to life, and there, just beyond the doorway, stood a creature, tall, sleek, and covered in metallic armor. Its eyes glowed a faint green, and its presence was suffocating. It was no mere predator. Elara drew her sidearm and aimed it, but her hands shook slightly. The creature hissed, low and ominous, before darting into the shadows again. "Report," Elara snapped, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her. "Nothing on sensors, Captain." "It's gone." Price's voice was tight, his breath short. "Elara, we're not equipped for this," Jensen said, his voice shaking now. "We need to leave. This is bigger than anything we've faced." Elara paused, staring at the darkened corridor ahead. The truth hung in the air. They weren't just under attack. They were being hunted. And she had no idea who, or what, was on the other side. "We don't leave until we know what happened to this station." "Stay alert," Elara commanded. "This isn't over." But in the pit of her stomach, she knew they had just crossed into something far darker than they had ever imagined. The Xel'Tharr were real, and they had come to sight her. Chapter 2. The moment the SS Perseus landed back at the colony's command center, Elara knew they were in uncharted waters. The dark clouds from the mining station's destruction loomed large in her mind, yet she couldn't afford to let her fear take over. Lives depended on her ability to think clearly, to act decisively. Inside the colony's central operations room, the crew stood at attention. The hum of equipment and the soft glow of monitors contrasted with the tense atmosphere. Elara's boots clicked sharply against the floor as she strode to the front of the room. The room fell silent as her presence commanded their focus. "We've barely scratched the surface of what we're facing," Elara began, her voice low but firm. "The Xel'Tharr are not here for simple conquest. They're hunting us, and they're already one step ahead." Lieutenant Price stepped forward, his face grim. "The mining station's communications are still down, and all the transport routes to other stations are compromised. If we don't act soon, they'll pick us off one by one." Elara nodded, understanding the stakes. "We need to know more. About the Xel'Tharr. About their weaknesses. This is no ordinary enemy." She turned to Dr. Zev Hargrove, the colony's lead scientist, who had been poring over the data from the mining station. "We've analyzed the remains from the station, Captain," Dr. Hargrove began, adjusting his glasses, his hands trembling slightly. "These creatures, whatever they are, aren't entirely biological. They seem to integrate technology with their bodies, almost symbiotically. And that's not all. There's a kind of electromagnetic pulse in their presence, as if they're creating a field that disrupts electronics." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. "Electromagnetic pulse," she repeated, her thoughts racing. "So they can render our weapons useless with just their presence?" Hargrove nodded. "Exactly. Their presence short-circuits anything electronic. Your guns, our communication systems, even the station's basic functions, they're all vulnerable." This revelation hit harder than anything Elara had heard all day. The Xel'Tharr weren't just stronger, they were smart. Their technology wasn't a threat on the battlefield alone, it was an equalizer, turning humanity's advanced systems against them. "We have to find a way to disrupt their abilities," Elara said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Something that can neutralize their electromagnetic pulse." Lieutenant Price glanced at the screen, then back at Elara. "We might have a lead. Dr. Hargrove, do you remember the alien artifact we found buried under the mining station? It's showing up on our scans. We thought it was just some kind of relic, but it's acting like a power source of some sort." Elara's brow furrowed. "A power source? How?" "We don't know yet," Price answered, "but it's giving off strange energy readings, like it's some kind of key, a sort of technology designed to interact with their kind." Dr. Hargrove interrupted, his voice tinged with urgency. "There's more. The artifact doesn't just power things. It seems to block certain frequencies. If it's working the way I think, we might be able to use it to jam the Xel'Thar's electromagnetic pulse, at least temporarily. It could give us the edge we need." Elara's pulse quickened. This was their first real lead. But it came with a price. "Where is it?" "It's deep within the caves beneath the station," Dr. Hargrove said, taking a deep breath. "It's in a locked chamber, accessible only by a narrow passage. There are security systems, automated defenses, and we're not sure what else." Elara scanned the faces of her crew. Fear lingered in their eyes. They had seen the carnage left in the Xel'Thar's wake. But there was no choice. "Not now." "All right," she said, the weight of command settling back into her shoulders. "Prepare an extraction team. We'll retrieve that artifact. It's our best shot at surviving this." The journey back to the mining station was fraught with tension. The storm clouds over Xel'Tharr seemed to match the heaviness in the air. As the SS Perseus descended through the thick atmosphere, Elara couldn't shake the image of the creature they had encountered, the gleaming eyes, the sleek metallic form, moving like a shadow. The crew was silent as they prepared for the mission. Weapons were checked, gear secured. There was a quiet understanding between them. This wasn't just another rescue operation. This was survival. Once on the ground, Elara and her team made their way back to the mining station on foot. The terrain was rough, overgrown with thick vines and alien flora that twisted unnaturally toward the sky. Their boots sank into the soil with each step, making their progress slow but deliberate. As they neared the station's entrance, Elara ordered everyone to fan out, their steps light, weapons raised. They had to assume the Xel'Tharr were watching. There was no longer any room for mistakes. "Stay close," Elara murmured into the comms, her voice barely audible. "We don't know what we'll find down there." The passage into the caves was narrow, the walls slick with moisture. They moved in silence, each step echoing in the cavernous space. Elara's eyes darted across the dimly lit corridors, constantly on the lookout. Every movement felt amplified, every footstep, every breath. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew heavier, thicker. There was a low hum in the distance, almost like a whisper, a sound that couldn't be placed but was felt deep in their bones. Elara pressed on, her determination as firm as ever. The artifact was their only hope, and nothing would stop her from reaching it. They finally reached the chamber. The air was thick with energy, and the walls seemed to pulse with a strange, electric rhythm. In the center of the room sat the artifact, glowing faintly against the dark stone. It was beautiful, intricate, like nothing Elara had ever seen before, an alien design that seemed both ancient and impossibly advanced. "I think we've found it," Hargrove whispered. But before anyone could approach, the ground trembled. The walls vibrated with a low, resonating hum that seemed to come from all directions. "Move. Now!" Elara shouted, pulling out her sidearm and training it on the shadows ahead. Suddenly, the Xel'Tharr appeared, their bodies shifting from the dark, blending into the walls before striking. They were everywhere, dozens of them. Elara's heart raced, but her mind remained sharp. "Cover the artifact," she yelled. "We need it now." A fierce battle erupted. The Xel'Tharr moved with terrifying speed, their attacks swift and coordinated. The crew fired in rapid succession, their weapons useless against the electromagnetic pulses that seemed to sap their strength. Elara fought, dodging strikes and desperately trying to protect the artifact. Every move, every breath counted. She couldn't let humanity's last hope slip away. As the team fended off the Xel'Tharr, Elara's focus remained on the artifact. It was their only chance, and she was determined to see it through. But the clock was ticking, and time was running out. Chapter 3 The tremor beneath Elara's feet was the first warning. The ground rumbled again, more violently this time, and dust from the cavern walls fell in small, staccato bursts. It wasn't the usual aftershock. This was different. The Xel'Tharr were near. Her pulse quickened. She had hoped that they might have a chance to retreat with the artifact before the creatures appeared, but hope was in short supply these days. The Xel'Tharr had made their move far sooner than anticipated. "Take cover!" Elara shouted, barely hearing her own voice above the thunderous sounds of the incoming attack. The cavern was large, its shadows deep, but the glow of the artifact illuminated the area around them in a faint, eerie light. Her team instinctively formed a protective perimeter around it, weapons raised, scanning for movement. Corporal Jensen crouched low beside Elara, his face tense with the strain of the moment. "Captain, they're everywhere." His voice was edged with panic, despite his attempts to suppress it. Elara didn't respond immediately, her eyes darting across the dark expanse. The Xel'Tharr were known for their ability to blend into the environment, their bodies a fusion of biomechanical elements that allowed them to disappear into shadows as if they were one with the darkness itself. It was almost impossible to detect them before they struck. "Stay sharp," she barked. "If we let them get close, we're done for. Use the artifact's energy as a shield. They'll have to come to us." The plan was risky. The artifact pulsed with an unearthly hum, but it wasn't yet clear if it would provide the protection they needed. However, desperate times called for desperate measures. A sudden screech broke the silence, a high-pitched sound that made the hairs on the back of Elara's neck stand up. It was a sound that pierced through the air with such ferocity that even her heartbeat seemed to synchronize with it. She spun, eyes wide, and there, just ahead, was the first of the Xel'Tharr. It emerged from the shadows like a phantom, its sleek, metallic body reflecting the pale light of the artifact. The creature's eyes glowed a toxic green, and its massive claws scraped against the stone floor as it stalked forward. Elara barely had time to react before it lunged at her. "Take it down!" Elara shouted, but the words were almost lost in the chaos that erupted. The creature was fast, impossibly so. One moment it was there, the next, it was a blur of motion. Jensen fired first, his weapon releasing a steady stream of plasma, but the Xel'Tharr dodged with a grace that defied its monstrous appearance. The blast hit the wall behind it, sending chunks of rock flying in all directions. "Damn it!" Jensen yelled, scrambling to reload. "It's too fast." Elara was already moving. Her gun locked onto the target, but before she could pull the trigger, the creature was upon her. It was faster than anything she had ever encountered, its sharp claws slashing through the air with inhuman precision. She ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding a deadly swipe, and came up with her sidearm aimed squarely at its chest. In one swift motion, she fired. The plasma blast hit the creature square in the chest, but it did not slow down. It screamed, a guttural sound of fury, and in retaliation, it slashed out with a speed that made Elara's heart skip a beat. She barely managed to raise her weapon in time to block the strike, but the force of the blow sent her flying back into the wall. Pain shot through her side, but Elara didn't have the luxury of pain. She scrambled to her feet, her fingers cold with fear but determined. This wasn't the time to hesitate. "Get to the artifact!" she shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We can't lose it!" Price, keeping his focus, fired a series of shots at the advancing Xel'Tharr, but it was clear that the shots weren't enough to slow it down. As it continued to advance, Elara saw it. Its body was a mass of shifting shadows and glistening metal, almost impervious to their attacks. Then, she had an idea. "Everyone, on my mark, target its legs," Elara ordered. She needed them to slow it down, make it vulnerable. She couldn't win a straight-up fight with this thing. But they could change the battlefield. Her team reacted quickly, their shots becoming more precise, aimed at the creature's legs. Jensen's plasma hit its thigh, causing the creature to falter for a moment, but only for a moment. Before Elara could give another command, a second Xel'Tharr appeared, and then another. The numbers were overwhelming. The cavern erupted into full-scale chaos. The sound of gunfire, the shrieks of the Xel'Tharr, and the panicked cries of Elara's crew filled the air. The walls shook with each movement, and the ground beneath them quivered as if the planet itself were alive and reacting to the battle. Price had moved toward the artifact, trying to position himself to activate its energy field. Elara saw him, saw the strain on his face as he worked quickly, his fingers trembling with the weight of the task at hand. "We need that energy field," Elara shouted, her voice cutting through the noise of the battle. She fired another shot at the advancing Xel'Tharr. The plasma burst hit the second creature square in the shoulder, and it staggered back, momentarily stunned. But it was still coming. "Ready the field," Elara urged, desperation creeping into her voice. Price slammed his hand down on the console next to the artifact, and the room lit up with a blinding pulse of energy. The Xel'Tharr hesitated. The electromagnetic pulse, the one thing that had kept their attacks effective, faltered under the influence of the artifact. For a brief, glorious moment, their shields seemed to flicker and drop. "Now!" Elara yelled. In that split second, her team let loose a coordinated barrage. The Xel'Tharr screamed in agony as the plasma blasts hit their exposed bodies. The force of the attacks was enough to stagger the creatures back, but it wasn't enough to kill them outright. Elara wasn't foolish enough to think victory was at hand just yet. The Xel'Tharr were relentless, and they were adapting faster than any of them could predict. One of the creatures turned to Price, its glowing green eyes locking onto him. In a blur, it moved toward him with unnatural speed. Elara fired, the shot landing just before it could reach her teammate, but it was too late. Price was knocked backward, his weapon falling from his hand as the creature pinned him to the ground. "No!" Elara screamed, charging forward. She tackled the creature off of Price, firing point-blank at its exposed underbelly. The blast burned through its armored skin, and the Xel'Tharr let out an ear-piercing screech. It was enough. The creature crumpled to the ground, and the others faltered for a moment, their aggression wavering. Elara grabbed Price, pulling him back to the safety of their position. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Elara's mind raced as she strategized for the next move. The artifact had given them an advantage, but it was only temporary. The Xel'Tharr were relentless. They would return, and this time they would be better prepared. "We can't keep fighting like this," Elara muttered, staring at the battered form of her team. "We need a plan. And fast." The war had just begun. Chapter 4. Elara's heart pounded as she moved through the darkened corridors of the SS Perseus. The battle had left its mark. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the control panel, but she fought to maintain composure. The crew was exhausted, battered, but they'd survived. For now. In the aftermath of their brutal encounter with the Xel'Tharr, they had taken refuge aboard the ship, but it wasn't long before they realized that the fight was far from over. The creatures were relentless, adaptable. Worse still, they knew humanity had finally caught their attention. Elara couldn't ignore the fact that something far larger was unfolding. The Xel'Tharr weren't just a random threat, they were a species driven by ancient instincts. Instincts that had shaped their culture, their technology, their very existence. But now, Elara had a weapon, a key, that could change the course of this conflict. Dr. Hargrove had been up all night, combing through the data they'd retrieved from the artifact. He'd found something that could provide them with answers. "Captain." The voice broke Elara's thoughts. She turned to find Dr. Hargrove, his face tired but filled with determination. He was holding a datapad, the screen filled with diagrams and ancient symbols. "What did you find?" Elara asked, though she already knew the answer. Hargrove's eyes were wide with excitement. "I think I've cracked it, Captain. The artifact. It's not just a weapon. It's a record. A record of the Xel'Tharr's entire history. Their rise. Their purpose." Elara stepped forward, her interest piqued. "Explain." The scientist handed her the datapad. "This symbol here," he pointed to a set of intricate markings on the screen, "is what we call the core glyph. It appears repeatedly throughout the artifact, and based on the translations I've done so far, it signifies dominion. The Xel'Tharr didn't evolve naturally like us. They were engineered, created by an ancient species for one sole purpose, to hunt and to conquer." Elara frowned, absorbing the weight of his words. "They were made for war." Hargrove nodded gravely. "Yes. And not just war in the conventional sense. The Xel'Tharr were bred to be the ultimate predators. But it's worse than that. Their creators built them with an inherent need to dominate, to eradicate any species that might rival them. They were designed as tools of extermination." Elara's stomach churned. She'd suspected the Xel'Tharr were no ordinary adversary, but the depth of their creation was chilling. "And we're just the latest target." "Precisely," Hargrove replied. "But there's more. From what I can gather, they aren't mindless killers. They're intelligent, highly intelligent. They understand strategy, they adapt quickly. Their society, if you can call it that, revolves around this concept of dominance. To them, humanity is simply another obstacle to be eliminated, a threat to their supremacy." Elara's fingers tightened around the datapad. "So, they're hunting us because we're a potential rival, not just because they want to conquer." "That's right," Hargrove confirmed. "They see any species that can expand, evolve, or develop advanced technology as a threat. It's not about territory, it's about survival. Their creator's ultimate goal was to make them the perfect weapon. But in doing so, they ensured the Xel'Tharr would always be in a cycle of hunting, evolving, and exterminating." Elara's mind raced as the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a war against an unstoppable ancient force, one that had been hunting for millennia. And humanity had just unwittingly walked into their crosshairs. "We need to stop them before they can complete their hunt," Elara said firmly. "How do we do that?" Hargrove hesitated, glancing down at the datapad again. "There's a flaw, Captain. A weakness in their design. The Xel'Tharr rely on a specific type of energy signature to sustain their abilities, especially their camouflage and their heightened combat instincts. If we can disrupt that energy source, we can effectively neutralize them." Elara's brow furrowed. "Disrupt their energy source? How do we do that?" "I believe the artifact can help us," Hargrove replied. "It contains a unique frequency, an anti-signal, if you will, that can block or reverse the Xel'Tharr's energy flow. But we need to find the right way to channel it. The artifact is a key, but it's only effective if we unlock its true potential." Elara's fingers tapped the side of her helmet. "So the artifact isn't just a weapon. It's a means of defense against them. We just need to figure out how to use it." Hargrove nodded, his face grim. "Exactly. But that's where it gets tricky. The artifact is also a part of something bigger, an ancient network, likely tied to the Xel'Tharr's creators. We don't fully understand it, but I suspect this network is what powers them. If we can tap into that network, we might have the leverage we need to defeat them." Elara turned to Price, who had been silently listening from the doorway. His eyes met hers, sharp and focused. "Do we have the resources to access this network? We've already seen how deadly the Xel'Tharr are. We need to be ready." "We don't have much time," Elara said, turning back to Hargrove. "If they're coming for us, we need a plan. Fast." Hargrove's face was drawn with exhaustion, but his resolve was clear. "There's a facility, an old outpost from the early days of the colony's establishment. It's a research station, isolated from the main colony. We could use it to study the artifact further. But getting there won't be easy. The Xel'Tharr will have already marked it as a priority target." Elara's mind spun with possibilities. They had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. She turned back to her team, now gathering at the briefing table. "We move out in 1 hour. No exceptions. We need that research station, and we need it now. We'll study the artifact there, and if we can unlock its secrets, we can take the fight to them." Dr. Hargrove raised an eyebrow. "You're willing to risk another engagement with the Xel'Tharr?" "There's no choice, Doctor," Elara replied, her voice hardening. "We're in this now. If we don't stop them, humanity is finished. I'm not going to let that happen." The crew exchanged glances, the weight of the mission heavy in the air. But Elara could see it in their eyes. They were ready. Ready to fight. Ready to survive. "Let's move out," Elara said, her voice ringing with authority. "We're going to make sure the Xel'Tharr learn the hard way that humanity does not go down without a fight." As her team gathered their gear and prepared for the mission, Elara couldn't help but wonder how much of their survival depended on the artifact. The secrets it held could either save them or destroy them all. There was no turning back now. The Xel'Tharr had come for humanity, and it was time for humanity to fight back. Chapter 5. The world outside the SS Perseus seemed to be on the edge of collapse. The winds howled through the broken atmosphere of Cider, carrying with them the oppressive weight of looming destruction. Elara Nash stood on the command deck, staring out into the vastness of space, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and strategies. She had always been a leader, calm under pressure, decisive when necessary. But today, there was no room for hesitation. The Xel'Tharr were closing in, and they were preparing for one final push that could obliterate everything humanity had built. "Captain, we're ready," Lieutenant Price's voice broke through her thoughts. Elara nodded and turned to face him. Her crew was prepared, but she could see the strain in their eyes. They'd been through hell already, and yet the worst was still to come. The Xel'Tharr had shown no mercy, no hesitation. This time, it would be different. This time, humanity was going to strike first. "All systems are green," Price continued. "We've analyzed the energy readings from the artifact. It's unstable, but it's our best shot." Elara's gaze flickered to the holographic display of the colony below. The artifact was their last hope. With it, they could disrupt the Xel'Tharr's electromagnetic pulse, rendering their cloaking abilities useless, and maybe, just maybe, turn the tide. But there was no certainty. The Xel'Tharr were relentless, and they had evolved for this moment. They had been hunting for centuries, and now humanity was simply another prey in their sights. "Understood," Elara said, her voice low but resolute. "Once we're down there, we don't have much time. We need to move fast." The descent to the surface of Xel'Tharr was as turbulent as the storm outside. The SS Perseus shuddered under the strain of the atmosphere, but Elara's crew had been trained for this. They kept their focus as they approached the designated landing zone, an old research station located in a remote area, far from the main colony. The ship landed with a dull thud, its engines cutting off as Elara stood. The air inside the cabin was thick with tension. There was no more room for second thoughts. They were on their own now. "Let's move," she ordered, her voice steady despite the rising anxiety. Her crew responded with practiced efficiency, securing their gear and heading toward the exit. The doors hissed open, revealing the wild, desolate landscape of Xel'Tharr. The research station stood in the distance, a broken structure that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. But Elara knew better. This was no mere ruin. This was their sanctuary and their battlefield. The moment they set foot on the ground, Elara's senses heightened. The Xel'Tharr could be anywhere. The landscape was silent, too silent, like the calm before a storm. They moved in a tight formation, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. They had to reach the station before the Xel'Tharr found them. The clock was ticking. Inside the research station, the air was stale, the walls cracked and covered in dust. It was a place long forgotten, a relic of humanity's early days on Xel'Tharr. But it was perfect. Isolated. Hidden. And it had the equipment they needed to stabilize the artifact. "We're almost there," Dr. Hargrove whispered, his voice tinged with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Stay sharp," Elara reminded him. "We don't know how fast they'll be able to track us. Move." They reached the central lab in a matter of minutes. The room was filled with old equipment, abandoned datapads, and scattered papers. But there, in the center of the room, stood the large workbench. It was here that they would attempt to harness the artifact's power. Elara turned to Hargrove. "Are we ready?" Dr. Hargrove took a deep breath, his eyes focused on the artifact as it sat in the middle of the table. "We have one shot at this. If we can calibrate the artifact's energy signature to match the Xel'Tharr's frequency, it will destabilize their energy flow. But we need to make sure it's aligned properly. A miscalculation could—" "Cut the speech, Doctor," Elara said, cutting him off. "Do it." Hargrove nodded, and his fingers flew across the controls, inputting data at an alarming rate. The screen in front of him flickered, then steadied. Elara watched, her heart racing. The silence in the room was deafening. Every moment that passed felt like an eternity. "Almost there," Hargrove muttered under his breath. The door behind them slammed open with a sudden force, sending a shockwave of sound through the station. Elara whipped around, her weapon raised. A Xel'Tharr stepped into the doorway, its silhouette bathed in the dim light of the lab. Its green eyes gleamed in the darkness, and Elara could hear the low hum of its energy field powering up. It was here. They had been found. "They've located us," Elara said, her voice calm, but her pulse quickened. Everyone, engage! Price and Jensen raised their weapons, firing a barrage of plasma shots at the creature. But the Xel'Tharr was too quick, its body twisting and contorting in ways that defied physics. It darted to the side, moving with a speed that left no time to react. Elara fired, hitting the creature in the shoulder, but it didn't stop. Instead, it hissed and charged toward them with terrifying speed. "Activate the field now!" Elara shouted. Hargrove scrambled, his hands moving frantically as he finished inputting the final commands. The artifact thrummed to life, its energy pulsing through the room in waves. A high-pitched hum filled the air as a wave of energy shot from the artifact, cascading through the station. For a moment, nothing happened. The Xel'Tharr continued its advance, unaffected by the energy blast. But then, the creature staggered, its movements jerky, as if it were suddenly fighting against an invisible force. Its cloak flickered, then vanished entirely. It was exposed, vulnerable. Elara didn't hesitate. She fired again, hitting the creature square in the chest. This time, it dropped to the floor, its body twitching with the last remnants of life. But Elara knew this was just the beginning. The Xel'Tharr were relentless, and they wouldn't stop coming. "We've got to finish this now," Elara yelled. "We're not done yet," Hargrove replied, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked feverishly at the console. "I need to recalibrate the frequency to hit the rest of their forces." Elara's gaze flickered toward the door. She could feel the tremors of more Xel'Tharr approaching. Time was running out. "There's no more time, Doctor." "We can't wait," Elara said, stepping forward. "Activate it now." Hargrove hesitated for a fraction of a second before slamming his hand down on the console. The artifact's energy flared, filling the room with a blinding light. Elara shielded her eyes, her heart racing. The moment the light dimmed, she knew. The artifact had worked. Outside, the Xel'Tharr forces, who had been closing in on the station, faltered. Their energy fields flickered and failed. Elara could see them staggering, disoriented. The artifact's power had disrupted their communication systems, their cloaking abilities. They were no longer the terrifying predators they had once been. But Elara knew better than to celebrate just yet. The battle was still ongoing, and the Xel'Tharr weren't finished. Not by a long shot. "We've got a chance," Elara said, her voice low but resolute. "Let's take it." With the artifact now stabilized, humanity had found a way to strike back. And Elara was ready to finish what they had started.